My grandmother's 80th birthday party had been planned for 6 weeks. Catered, flowers on the dining table. 3 generations in the same house, for the first time since my grandfather's funeral 4 years ago. Cousins who had flown in from Phoenix and Denver. Aunts who had driven from Memphis and Knoxville. The kind of gathering that my grandmother had been describing as the last big one, with the cheerful morbidity of someone who has earned the right to say such things. She was seated in the chair of honor near the window. I was standing near the kitchen doorway with a glass of sweet tea, talking to my cousin Marcus about his daughter's school play, when my sister Renee stood up. The room did not register her standing immediately. People stand at parties. They move toward the buffet, toward the bathroom, toward a better conversation. But Renee did not move toward anything. She stood in the center of the living room, and she turned until she found me and she pointed. And then she said, at full volume, in a room containing 23 members of our family, including our 80-year-old grandmother in her chair of honor, "I need everyone to hear this. Call the police. Someone call them right now." The room went the specific silence of a crowd that has not yet understood what it is witnessing. She stole $220,000 from me. 22 heads turned toward me, my grandmother's face. My mother's hands, which had been holding a plate, now held nothing. Marcus, beside me, made a sound that was not a word. I looked at Renee across the living room. She was breathing hard, the way people breathe when they have been building towards something for a long time and have finally allowed it out. Her eyes were bright with the specific energy of someone who has decided that this room, this gathering, this audience is the correct arena. She had miscalculated the arena. I set down my sweet tea. I walked to the dining table where I had placed my bag when I arrived, 2 hours and 14 minutes earlier. I reached inside. I placed a folder on the table. Tan. Letter-sized, 2 inches thick, labeled on the tab in my handwriting, RENEE, complete file. I looked at my sister. "Already did," I said, pause. "Everything you just said is in there. My name is Serena Ackerwells. I am 41 years old. I am a forensic accountant with 15 years of experience, currently operating my own practice in Memphis, Tennessee. Where my professional function, the thing I am licensed and certified and court-qualified to do, is reconstruct financial histories, identify irregularities, and produce documentary evidence that holds up in legal proceedings. I am not easy to accuse of financial crimes. My sister Renee is 38. She is creative, magnetic, and has spent the better part of a decade in a cycle of entrepreneurial enthusiasm followed by entrepreneurial collapse. A boutique in 2016 that lasted 14 months. A catering company in 2018 that dissolved after a supplier dispute. A wellness coaching business in 2020 whose website still exists but whose clients, as far as I can determine, do not. In January of this year, Renee called me with an opportunity. She had found a commercial property in Nashville, a mixed-use building, ground-floor retail with 3 residential units above. The asking price was $890,000. She had a contact at a private lending firm. She needed a co-investor to demonstrate sufficient capital for the down payment and the first 6 months of debt service. She needed $220,000 from me. As a loan, she said, or as equity, whatever makes more sense for your taxes. I've run the numbers. The rental income alone covers the debt service in month 4. I asked for the numbers. She sent them. I reviewed them with the attention of someone who reviews financial projections professionally and understood, within 45 minutes, that the numbers had been assembled to look correct rather than to be correct. Vacancy rates understated. Renovation costs missing from the projection entirely. Rental comps drawn from a zip code adjacent to the property rather than the property's actual location. I told Renee I needed 2 weeks to conduct due diligence. She said the opportunity would not wait 2 weeks. I said the opportunity would wait or I would not participate. She agreed. I conducted the due diligence. What I found was not a bad investment exactly. The property existed. The lender existed. The projected rental income, if the renovation costs were correctly accounted for and the vacancy assumptions were corrected, produced a marginal but defensible return. What I also found, in the third week of my review, was something that had nothing to do with the property. In the documents Renee had provided, the lender term sheet, the property inspection, the title search, there was a name I did not recognize on the private lending firm's disclosure. A managing member I had not seen in any of Renee's prior descriptions of the deal. I ran the name through the Tennessee Secretary of State's Business Registry. What came back was a company registered 8 months earlier, whose registered agent was Renee's boyfriend, a man named Troy Alcott. The private lending firm was called Meridian Growth Capital, LLC. It had been registered in Tennessee in June of last year. Managing member, Troy Alcott. Registered agent, Troy Alcott. Mailing address, an apartment in East Nashville that a public records search confirmed was Troy Alcott's current residence. Renee had been dating Troy for 19 months. I had met him twice. He was pleasant, vague about his professional activities in the way that people are vague when they have learned that specificity invites scrutiny. And he had an explanation for everything before you finished asking. I called a colleague named Dr. Patricia Mensah, who is a certified fraud examiner in Nashville and who has worked alongside me on 3 court matters in the past 4 years. I described the structure. A borrower sourcing capital from a co-investor, she said, to make a down payment on a property whose financing comes from a private lender controlled by the borrower's romantic partner. Yes, I said. And the co-investor doesn't know about the relationship between the borrower and the lender. Correct. A pause. Serena, that is a classic affinity fraud structure. The co-investor puts in the down payment. The lender, controlled by the partner, charges above-market fees and points that come out of the deal. The co-investor's money doesn't go to the property, or goes to the property through a structure designed to benefit the lender entity. That's what I'm seeing, I said. What stage is it in? She's still asking. I haven't transferred anything. Good, Patricia said. Keep it that way and start building the file. I built the file. Over the following 6 weeks, I used the tools of my profession: public records searches, business registry cross-references, court filing databases, Tennessee UCC lien searches, to reconstruct the complete financial picture of Meridian Growth Capital, LLC, and its principals. What I found: Meridian Growth Capital had been involved in 3 prior real estate transactions in the Nashville area. In each transaction, a co-investor had contributed between $80,000 and $190,000 toward a property acquisition. In each transaction, Meridian had served as the senior lender and had charged origination fees of 6-8%, 3 to 4 times market rate, plus monthly servicing fees documented in the loan agreements. In 2 of the 3 transactions, the co-investors had subsequently filed civil complaints alleging that the loan terms had been misrepresented and that their equity positions had been diluted to near zero by the fee structure before the properties generated any meaningful cash flow. Both complaints had been settled confidentially. Total documented prior co-investor losses, $247,000 across 2 settled cases. I was going to be case number 3. Except I was a forensic accountant who had spent 6 weeks building the file before transferring $1. I called an attorney named James Whitmore of Whitmore and Cole in Memphis, who handles financial fraud matters and who reviewed my documentation over 1 week. His assessment memo, which arrived on a Thursday and which I printed and placed in the tan folder. The documented pattern constitutes wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343 and potentially conspiracy charges for multiple actors. The prior settled cases establish pattern evidence. The relationship between the borrower and the lender constitutes an undisclosed material conflict of interest that, had it been disclosed, would have materially affected the co-investor's decision. You have sufficient documentation to file a federal complaint and a parallel civil action. I had filed the federal complaint with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Memphis on a Monday morning. Case number FCI 2024-4471. The folder contained the complaint, the acknowledgement, the 6-week investigation summary, the prior case filings, the Meridian Growth Capital registration documents, the evidence of Troy Alcott's role, and James Whitmore's assessment memo. I had brought it to my grandmother's 80th birthday party because I had known, with the professional certainty of someone who has watched fraud schemes behave according to predictable patterns, that Renee was approaching the moment where the pressure to complete the transaction would produce one of two things: an escalation or a retreat. Renee does not retreat. She had built a 6-week investigation, filed a federal fraud complaint, retained legal counsel, and placed the complete file in a tan folder that she had carried to her grandmother's birthday party because she understood the psychology of what was coming. She had not transferred a single dollar. She had not confronted Renee privately. She had waited for the moment Renee would choose, and Renee had chosen the most public moment available. Stay with me. In the 6 weeks between my federal filing and my grandmother's birthday, Renee called me 11 times. The calls followed a recognizable arc, the arc of a scheme that has a deadline and is encountering resistance it did not plan for. Weeks 1 and 2, patient. She was giving me time. The due diligence was reasonable. She understood. The property was still available. Troy had extended the closing window as a professional courtesy. Week 3, more urgent. The closing window was closing. Another investor had expressed interest. She didn't want to lose the opportunity to someone else when this was supposed to be our deal. Week 4, personal. She had been thinking about our relationship. She felt like I didn't trust her. Did I trust her? She was her sister. When had she ever given me a reason not to trust her? I could have listed the reasons. I did not. I'm still reviewing, I said on each call. I'll let you know when I'm ready. Week 5, Troy called me directly. He had gotten my number from Renee. He was professional, warm, and precise in the way of someone who has delivered a version of this call before. He wanted to answer any questions I had. He wanted me to feel comfortable. He wanted to make sure I understood the opportunity I was being offered. I thanked him. I told him I would call back. I did not call back. I called James Whitmore and told him Troy Alcott had contacted me directly and that I had the call recorded. Tennessee is a one-party consent state, which I had confirmed before week 1. Good, James said. Add the recording to the file. Week 6, Renee arrived at my house unannounced on a Thursday evening. She stood at my door and she was not performing anymore. The warmth was gone, the patience was gone. And what was left was something rawer. The specific frustration of someone who has watched a plan fail to produce its expected result and cannot understand why. Why won't you just trust me, she said. I do trust you, I said. I don't trust the deal. It's the same thing. It isn't, I said. Come inside. She did not come inside, she left. The birthday party was 12 days later. I brought the folder. She had the federal case number. She had the prior victim filings. She had Troy Alcott's recorded phone call. She had James Whitmore's assessment memo and 6 weeks of documented investigation. And she had placed all of it in a tan folder that she had carried into a room with 23 family members because she understood that Renee's next move would be public, and that public required a public answer. The folder was already on the table when Renee stood up. After I placed the folder on the table and said, "Already did," the room held its silence for what I counted as 8 full seconds. My grandmother, in her chair of honor near the window, was watching with the stillness of a woman who has lived 80 years and knows that some moments require witness rather than intervention. Renee looked at the folder, then at me. "What is that?" she said. "You asked for the police," I said. "I contacted them 4 weeks ago." The folder is a copy of the federal complaint and the supporting documentation. You called the police on me. I filed a complaint with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit documenting a scheme designed to defraud me of $220,000, I said. The scheme involved you sourcing capital from me for a property whose financing was controlled by your romantic partner without disclosure of that relationship. A sound went through the room. Not a gasp, something more interior. The collective recalibration of 22 people who had arrived at a birthday party and are now inside a different event entirely. My mother said, "Renee, she's lying," Renee said. "She never gave me any money. How can I steal money she never gave me?" "You're correct," I said. "I never transferred the money. Because I spent 6 weeks investigating the deal before I did." "Then what?" "What I filed," I said, "is a complaint documenting the structure of the scheme, including the 2 prior co-investors who did transfer money and subsequently lost a combined $247,000 through the same mechanism. Their civil complaints are in the folder." Renee stared at me. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said. "I am a named target of the scheme. I have standing to report it." "I did. My uncle Marcus, not my cousin, my father's older brother, who has the family authority that comes from being the eldest and from never using it carelessly," said quietly. "Renee." "Sit down." Renee did not sit down. "You're trying to destroy me," she said. "You've always resented me. Everything I try to build, I'm trying to make sure you don't go to federal prison," I said. The room went very still. "The complaint I filed names the scheme and its principles. Your name is in the complaint in the context of sourcing co-investors. Troy Alcott is the primary subject. The FBI investigates the structure. What they find determines who they charge. Your level of cooperation with the investigation will affect how your role is characterized." I slid the folder to the center of the table. "Everything I just said is documented in there. I'd like you to take it to an attorney, today, not tomorrow." Renee looked at the folder. She looked at me. She looked at the room. 22 people who had come to celebrate their grandmother's 80th birthday and were now watching 2 sisters stand on opposite sides of a table with a tan folder between them. She sat down. The room had heard everything. The federal case number, the prior victims, the $247,000 in documented prior losses, the recorded phone call from Troy Alcott, and the one fact that changed the shape of the entire confrontation. Renee had accused her sister of stealing money that had never been transferred, because Serena had spent 6 weeks investigating before she gave them a single dollar. Stay with me for what the investigation produced, and for the conversation between the sisters that happened 2 days later. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Memphis had assigned Special Agent Dana Reeves to the case. I know this because Agent Reeves had called me on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after I filed the complaint, to conduct an initial interview. She was precise, professional, and had reviewed my documentation with the attention of someone who understands forensic accounting and did not need me to explain what a UCC lien search was. "The prior cases," she said, "you found these through public records." "Tennessee court filing database," I said. "Civil complaints are public record." Both cases were settled confidentially, but the initial complaint filings are available. And the business registration linking Alcott to Meridian Growth Capital, Tennessee Secretary of State. Standard registry search. She was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Acafferwells, what is your professional background?" "Forensic accountant," I said. 15 years. "Court qualified in Tennessee and 4 other states." Another pause. "I see," she said. "That explains the quality of this file. The investigation, I was informed through James Whitmore over the following weeks, had expanded. The 2 prior victims had been contacted. Both had agreed to cooperate. A subpoena had been served to Meridian Growth Capital's banking institution, producing account records that showed the origination fees from the prior 2 transactions, $31,400 and $22,800 respectively, had been transferred within 72 hours of receipt to a personal account in Troy Alcott's name. There was also a 5th transaction that had not appeared in my public records search, a proposed deal in Chattanooga that had been in the sourcing phase when the investigation began. The prospective co-investor in that deal was contacted by Agent Reeves and had not yet transferred any funds. Total documented scheme: 4 targeted co-investors across 18 months. Total completed fraud: $247,000. Total prevented by my investigation: $220,000 from me and an undisclosed amount from the Chattanooga co-investor. Troy Alcott was charged under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, wire fraud, and 18 U.S.C. Section 1349, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, on counts corresponding to each completed fraudulent transaction. The conspiracy charge implicated anyone who had participated in structuring and sourcing the deals with knowledge of the fraudulent mechanism. Renee's attorney, a woman named Patricia Cole, whom she had retained within 48 hours of the birthday party, reached out to James Whitmore 4 days after the charges were announced. Renee was offering full cooperation with the federal investigation, complete, including her knowledge of the deal structures, her communications with Troy about the sourcing process, and everything she knew about the Chattanooga deal and 2 additional targets that had not yet been identified by the investigation. "She's going to be a cooperating witness," James told me. "Good," I said. "You understand that cooperation typically results in a declination of prosecution for the cooperating party." "I understand," I said. "That was always the best outcome." James was quiet for a moment. "Did you anticipate this?" I thought about it. "I anticipated that Renee's best option was cooperation," I said. "I built the file to make that clear." Whether she chose it was her decision. She had chosen it. Which meant that the system worked exactly the way it is designed to work, when the documentation is complete enough to make the correct choice also the obvious choice. Troy Alcott was convicted on 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. Sentenced to 41 months in federal prison and ordered to pay $247,000 in restitution to the 2 prior victims. Renee received a formal declination letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office, acknowledging her substantial assistance in the investigation. She called me when the letter arrived. The call lasted 6 minutes. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. My grandmother's birthday party, the part that happened before Renee stood up, was beautiful. My grandmother told me this afterward. She called me on a Monday, and we talked for 40 minutes, and she said, "The food was good and the flowers were nice, and then your sister created a scene, and then you handled it, and then we all had cake." "I'm sorry it happened at your birthday," I said. "Don't be," she said. "I've been watching you 2 for 41 years. I've been watching Renee run toward things and you walk toward them. I always knew one of you was going to end up building the file." I laughed, the first genuine laugh of that particular period. "Did you know about Troy?" I asked. "I didn't like him," she said. "That's not the same thing." "But it's adjacent." The 2 prior victims in Troy's scheme received restitution payments through the court's structured schedule, $31,400 and $22,800 respectively, plus statutory interest. I was contacted by both independently through James Whitmore's office. Both wanted to know how I had found the case filings. I told them, Tennessee Court Filing Database, public record. Available to anyone who knows to search it. Both of them separately said the same thing. "I wish I had looked." I thought about how to respond to that and I said, "Most people don't know to look before. I had a professional advantage." That's not a character distinction, it's a knowledge one. The Meridian Growth Capital, LLC, was dissolved following Troy's conviction. The Nashville property, the one that had been the instrument of the deal, was never acquired. It sold to a different buyer 6 months later. Renee and I speak on the phone every 2 weeks. The calls are shorter than they used to be and more honest than they have ever been. She is actually working, at a property management company in Nashville where she does leasing, and she is good at it in the specific way. She has always been good at connecting with people. She does not ask me for financial advice. I do not offer it. We talk about our grandmother, we talk about the cousins. We talk, occasionally, about what we each learned from the year that the birthday party fell in the middle of. She said in one of those calls, "You could have just not come. Or come and said nothing. You were going to create a scene either way," I said. "I just wanted to make sure the scene had the right information in it." A pause. "The folder," she said. "The folder," I said. She laughed. It was not a full laugh, but it was a beginning. I want to talk about the accusation. Not the fraud scheme, the specific act of standing in a room full of family and saying, "Call the police." She stole $220,000 from me, about a person who had not stolen anything, who had not transferred a dollar, who had spent 6 weeks doing the professional work of understanding exactly what she was being asked to walk into. People ask, "How did you stay calm?" I want to answer that honestly because I think the honest answer is more useful than the flattering one. I stayed calm because I had the folder. Not because I am a uniquely composed person. Not because the accusation didn't affect me. It did, in the specific, painful way that public accusations by people you love always affect you, regardless of your certainty about the facts. I stayed calm because calm was the correct strategic position. When someone accuses you publicly of a crime in a room full of witnesses, they are betting on one of two responses. Either you collapse into denial and defense, which looks guilty, or you escalate into anger, which looks guilty differently. Both responses center the accusation as the organizing fact of the room. The folder centered something else. The folder said, "This room already has a fact structure, and the fact structure was built before you stood up, and the fact structure does not require your accusation to be true in order to be useful." The folder said, "I was here first, not emotionally, documentarily." I want to say something to every person who has ever been the target of a public accusation. In a family room, in a workplace, in any space where someone decided that the best offense was to make you defend yourself before you had a chance to speak. The accusation is loudest at the moment of delivery. After that moment, it is just a claim, and a claim without documentation is precisely as strong as the documentation on the other side of the table. You do not win against a false accusation by arguing louder. You win by having built the file before the accusation was made. This is the thing that sounds simple and is actually the entire lesson. Before matters more than during. Before is where you request the business registry records. Before is where you run the court filing search. Before is where you call the FBI and receive a case number. Before is where you place the tan folder in your bag on the morning of your grandmother's birthday party, not because you know you'll need it, but because you've done enough forensic work to understand that people who build fraudulent schemes behave predictably, and predictability can be prepared for. My sister stood in that room, and she chose the biggest, loudest, most legally weighted weapon available to her. The word police, the number $220,000, the full audience, and she pointed it at me. And I looked at her, and I told her I had already called them because I had, 4 weeks earlier, with documentation she had not imagined I possessed. This is what preparation looks like, not speed. Not volume, not the sharp, satisfying reply that arrives in the moment. The file you build before the moment arrives. The folder you carry to a birthday party. The case number you receive on a Monday morning 4 weeks before anyone raises their voice in a room. Build the file. Carry the folder. Let the documentation speak first. And when someone says call the police, be the person who already did. Case FCI 2024-4471, closed. Troy Alcott, 41 months federal. Restitution, $247,000 ordered. The 2 prior victims paid. The Chattanooga deal stopped. Renee, cooperating witness, declining prosecution. The folder is filed. My grandmother turned 80. We had cake. Build the file, carry it with you. Be the person who already called, before they told you to. If you have ever been in a room where someone pointed at you and used the loudest word they had, if you have ever been accused of something by someone who did not know you had already built the answer, if you have ever been the person who walked in prepared while someone else walked in loud, leave 2 words below. Already did, that's all. And if someone in your life is sitting, right now, with a deal that doesn't add up, a request that came too fast, a structure that makes sense on the surface and wrong underneath, send this to them today. Run the registry, pull the court filings, build the file, because the loudest accusation in the room is no match for the quietest documentation. Be the person who already called.